Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar from the Education Writers Association. The topic is how to sell your book on education. I'm Allison Kowalski, a program specialist with EWA. I'm going to start by introducing our moderator. Our moderator for today's conversation is Adam Harris, a journalist at The Atlantic and author of The State Must Provide, which will be released in August of next year. And I'm going to turn it over to Adam to introduce our speakers and get started on this conversation.
Thanks so much, Allison. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm really looking forward to this panel. Today we have Melissa Korn, Wall Street Journal reporter and author of Unacceptable, Privilege, Deceit, and Making of the College Admission Scandal. Danielle Dreilinger, the author of The Secret History of Home Economics. Jeff Selingo, the author of Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions. And Gail Ross, the president of the Ross Yoon Agency. So as we're getting started, I want to give each of our speakers this evening about 3 minutes to describe their books to the audience. And we're just going to go around the horn. Melissa, I'm going to go to you first. Can you just talk to us a little bit about this?
Sure. Hi, good evening, everybody. So Unacceptable is a book about the Varsity Blues college admissions scandal. I co-wrote it with another Wall Street Journal reporter, Jennifer Levitz, came out in July. The book gets into the backstory of the scheme's mastermind, Rick Singer. It talks about the different prongs of this really fascinating, complex scandal. And it puts it all in context of what's going on in college admissions, how we got to this point where some of these families thought that they needed to break laws to get their kids into a particular school. You know, why there's this frenzy around certain name brands, why competition has become so fierce at those particular schools. And frankly, we end with some questions about what does this all mean now? What kind of reform has there been or hasn't there been? And we've gotten great reviews on the book so far. I hope that you guys do pick it up because we put a lot of work into it.
And Danielle, can you tell us about The Secret History of Home Economics?
Great, yeah, so I am the author of this book. I'm still working on my elevator speech. So it is, in fact, the secret history of a completely underestimated and unknown discipline that people think is just, you know, corn muffins and housewives, but it was founded by businesswomen and scientists as a way to empower women to have careers and to be freed from household drudgery. And only later did it become co-opted by people who thought it was a great way to keep women in their place. And then it starts in 1800, it ends with what is up with home economics today and some ideas for why and whether and how we should bring it back. And it is done well. The writing is done, the copy editing is done, it's in production. I have to finalize the book cover tomorrow morning, and it's going to be out on W.W. Norton in May.
Awesome. And Jeff.
Thanks, Adam. So I'm the author of Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions, which came out September 15th, so just a couple of weeks ago. It is essentially an inside look at the ecosystem of college admissions as told through three main buckets of characters. The first one being college admissions offices themselves. So I was embedded for an entire admissions cycle at three colleges and universities, Davidson College in North Carolina, Emory University in Atlanta, and the University of Washington in Seattle. And so we basically walk through the entire process with admissions officers, starting with their training through reading season, early decision, regular decision, and then shaping of the class and welcoming the class in the spring of 2019. The second group of characters are the students themselves. So I followed a group of a couple dozen high school seniors that year who had applied everywhere and ended up choosing 3 students to profile as part of the book, and we go through their journey of applying to many different colleges, and they end up at colleges that are beyond those 3 that I profiled in the book. And then the third cast of characters are all the influencers that applicants really never see, but that make up the $10 billion admissions industry. So marketing, rankings, testing, financial aid consultants that help colleges decide who to enroll and who not to enroll based on how much they can pay. So there's that whole part of the process that really influences who gets in and why, but that most people don't know even exists.
Absolutely. So to kind of jump in, I mean, the first place that you start with the book is kind of the development. So thinking about the idea, saying that this is more than just a long feature article for the Wall Street Journal or for the Atlantic or for the Chronicle, that this is going to be a actual book. So Danielle, I actually want to go to you first. Can you just talk to us a little bit about kind of when you realized that this was more than just a long story, that this was actually a book?
So that's a really interesting question, because my book did not come about that way. It didn't grow out of the beat. It's not like I mean, I've been covering education for 5 years. I hadn't heard diddly squat about home economics. And what I did instead, and this is actually not a bad, I actually really recommend this. I was applying for the Knight Wallace Fellowship, and I was reapplying. I had been a finalist. And so I was thinking about a project idea. And I've always wanted to write a book. So I thought, well, this is going to be the perfect opportunity. I can have a whole academic year to start a book. And you know, a lot of people in education reporting certainly like take that route, the, you know, get the fellowship to write the book idea. So I just was thinking about what I wanted the book to be, because I didn't like my previous idea. So I wanted it to be about education, because I've been covering education. I figured it'd be easiest to sell. Also, obviously, I wanted to use my expertise. It had to support a book and not just be a long feature story. I wanted to have something to do with history, because I like to read history. I wanted it to concern race, gender, and class, because it felt like otherwise it wouldn't be relevant. Like, why would you want to read that book now? And finally, I thought it should have something to do with something that I find really fun, because I knew it was going to be a huge amount of work. So I knew that the University of Michigan, where Knight Wallace is, has this big cooking and kitchen library collection. And I cook a ton, I knit, I crochet. And so I just put all those ideas together, honestly, in my head. And I just went away and like worked on, at the Times-Picayune, like doing my beat stories. And after a couple of weeks, like I truly just had one of those brainwaves. I was like, oh wait, home economics. The history of the class that taught girls to cook. I mean, as it turns out, it's much more than that. And that just suddenly hit me. I was like, this is a great idea. And like, you read those things every so often about how we should bring home ec back. Think of all of the, you know, the revival of craftivism and pussy hats and like mason jars, right? And food TV. And I was like, why have I never heard of this? The revival of career tech education. Like, why have I never heard of this? And then I learned that the woman who founded home economics was the first woman who went to MIT, which just immediately, you know, blew my mind. And like everything I thought I knew about this field was wrong. So that's how I got the idea. It was like this structured brainwave, and I just knew that it was an amazing idea. And it's great to go about things that way, because through all of the difficulties of writing the book, I've never for a minute lost faith in the idea that I started with.
And Melissa and Jeff, I'm actually going to come to you all with the same question, but between that, Gail, I actually wanted to ask you, kind of as we're thinking about this process question of the proposal development and thinking about the development of a book, when should people start thinking about going to an agent? Is it when they know that they want to write a book? Is it after they've already come up with the idea for a book? When should they start looking for an agent?
You know, it happens at different stages for different people. I always say that sometimes I'm involved from the germ of the idea all the way through, hopefully, a bestseller list, or sometimes I'm selling a book right now that's a completed memoir, 350 pages I have out, which is very rare for me to send something like that out. So it depends. I mean, if you're in an ongoing relationship with your agent, then you may just, just throw around ideas, spitball things, come in and talk about, or just, do a brain dump on an email of some ideas and what you're thinking about. If you don't already have a relationship and you don't, then you probably need more to get people's attention. I mean, the most important thing really is that you know, or you think you have both the time and the heart and the, you know, the need to just do it, because as everybody on this panel is going to tell you, it's an enormous amount of work, and the bar today is very high. But you know, I love journalists more than any other human beings in the world. So well, a lot of it is stylistic. When people want, or you know, I love getting in and getting my hands dirty and working on that proposal and playing at the beginning. So, but some people don't. I mean, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, "Oh, so and so wouldn't even talk to me till I had a 50-page proposal." So it really depends on the agent you're talking to.
And Melissa, so your book kind of grew out of the great reporting you all were doing at the Wall Street Journal. So can you just walk me through when that went from, you know, this is the beat to this is the book?
Yeah, so I feel like people are going to hate this answer. Agents came to us the day the story broke. So they didn't know yet that we were going to have a bunch of great reporting. They knew that we had written a couple of stories on March 12th, 2019. And then I heard from 2 agents that day, 3 the next day. Realized that one of them was had represented my then colleague John Carreyrou for his book Bad Blood, had worked with a couple of other journal reporters, and I reached out to them and asked what they thought of him. He had a very good reputation among my colleagues. Met with him for coffee back when that was a thing you did in person. And, you know, he said, "This is going to be a book. Do you want to be the one to write it?" I said, "That sounds fun. I've never done anything like this before. It's terrifying. I don't want to do it alone." So I called Jennifer, with whom I had not worked much before. We had written now maybe 3 stories together. We knew each other's reputations within the newsroom, but we didn't have any real kind of working relationship. And I called her and said, "Hey, do you want to write a book with me? Like, do you want to be the person that I talk to most of any other living soul for the next year?" She said, "Sure, let's do it." So we did. And frankly, when I met with our agent, he walked through and wrote on a napkin, like, here's like the 5 or 6 themes I see kind of being the bones of this story, of this book. And that turned into our book proposal, which we hewed to quite closely as we wrote through the whole book. And we put together the book proposal over the course of that first weekend. We just kind of plowed through and put together, I don't even know how many thousands of words, and sent it off to Eric. And you know, then it was pitched out to publishers. But it all happened extremely quickly. And it was a bit of a whirlwind. And I know that that's not the way it normally goes. So I'm very grateful for the fact that it happened so smoothly and so quickly. And, you know, I was like Danielle, I kind of always knew I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what I was going to write about. But then this story happened, and it was so juicy and scandalous, but also just reflected so many other big themes that are relevant today. And I couldn't pass that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, as someone who has done this before, you know, you've written a couple of books now, including, you know, New York Times bestsellers. Can you walk us through the process of, after you've written that first book, you know, when you're thinking about bringing a new idea to writing books each time, how are you sort of thinking through that process?
Well, it's partially what I know, right? So, and I have a great agent in Gail. And so after my second book, There Is Life After College, I kind of wanted to try something new and different. And Gail may not even remember this, but I brought an idea that didn't really work. It was probably more of an article than a book. And you know, Gail, I think, you know, in that back and forth discussion, and this is why having a great agent and having that relationship that Gail mentioned, I think is really important. You know, she said, "Let's go back to the drawing board." And that's when I started to realize that every time I wrote a piece, you know, at that time I was doing a weekly column for the Washington Post. I was writing on occasion for the Atlantic, and every time I did something about admissions, I would get inundated with mail. with email and calls, and it just seemed to keep bubbling over and over again. And and after covering higher education for 20 years, you usually find almost every story kind of boring in some ways because you've done it before. But this was kind of new and exciting to me because I hadn't covered, as Adam and probably everybody on this call knows, like Eric Hoover at the Chronicle has covered higher education, has covered admissions and for the Chronicle forever. So it was like the only beat at the Chronicle that I never covered. And so it was finally a chance to dive into something. And the great thing was I knew you can write a book about this because 20 years earlier, there was a book about this with Jack Steinberg and the Gatekeepers. And so I went back and I read that book and I realized, this is, class of 2001, I think, or 2002 that he was looking at Wesleyan. And as I was reading the book, I realized just how much had changed in admissions. Obviously, everything was paper back then. Now it was electronic, but the whole move toward holistic review, the move towards the huge growth in applications, there were all these things that I could point out that were different from Jack's book. He also looked at, one college. I thought there was an opportunity to look at a big public. I thought there was all this stuff around admissions, and I said this to Melissa last night at the Politics and Prose discussion. I really looked at Fast Food Nation as kind of a deep dive into an ecosystem. And I wanted to do something about admissions in that way, where Jack looked at, one institution and looked at both sides of the coin, students applying to that institution and the gatekeepers on the other side of it. I wanted to look at very much this way that Fast Food Nation did, this whole ecosystem that kind of drives students along.
If I can jump in just quickly, Adam, you asked originally also kind of how do you know something's more than just a long story? Mm-hmm. So when you find that you have 3 times or 10 times as much still in your notes that never even remotely got into the story that are just as good as that main story, you have something more, right? You have something more than an 800-word news hit or more than a 2,000-word feature. The longest story I had ever written before this was about 2,000 words. And that was really daunting to know that I would be writing, 40 times as much, 50 times as much for the book. And I actually, one of the things that helped keep Jennifer and me sane throughout the writing process was thinking of each chapter as essentially 3 page 1 stories. That was the length. And that seemed feasible, right? That biting it off in those types of chunks. So each chapter in our mind was like a couple of big stories, but we never really thought through kind of, oh my gosh, there's 85,000 words coming down the pike. It was, here's the 6,000 words, here's the 8,000 words. So each chapter became its own little story. And that again, helped keep us sane and just kept it in perspective, because as news reporters for a newspaper, we were so used to writing shorter that it's not a muscle. It's not something that necessarily comes naturally to write that long for that long, for so many times over.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm saying that's why the discipline of a book proposal is a good exercise, because sometimes I've had clients who've written the proposal and then realized they have nothing more to say. That's it. That's a bad sign. That's a bad sign, but it is good discipline.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention when I was going through my proposal, me and my agent worked on it for, probably 7 to 8 months of actually crafting the proposal and molding it to where it got to a point where I was like, oh, this was what I had at the beginning. It was just going to be about this very specific thing, and then as we broadened out, it became a real proposal than an actual book. I guess for each of you, as you were working through your proposal, Melissa, you talked a little bit about how your proposal process went. When you were kind of working back and forth with your agent, getting ready to prep the proposal to sell the book, can you just kind of talk a little bit about kind of prepping the proposal for taking it to editors?
Yes.
And yeah, Melissa, I'll give you first.
Sure. So again, it was all very fast. So story broke on March 12th. We wrote our proposal that following weekend. What was it? The 16th, 17th, 18th. it was in front of editors by early April. So it was crazy hectic, and we were covering it the day to day for the journal at the same time. So yeah, Danielle, pretty much. It was hectic. So we actually had asked our agent, because again, neither of us had ever written a book before. We had never written a book proposal before. So we asked our agent if we could see a sample. Like, what does a really good book proposal look like? And he gave us one of a book that had then went on to sell very well, and was a book that we had both read and really enjoyed. So it was helpful to see the proposal version when we knew what the final book version looked like. And we really modeled ours on that. So if you're kind of at that point, ask somebody who's written a book if you can see their proposal, what it looks like, how detailed is it? Is it more of an outline? Is it, how much did it change to the final version? Because that helped us just understand what the scope should be, what kind of tone to take, things like that. We went through probably 2 or 3 rounds of edits with our agent, and he's a very kind of hands-on, really good editor, so it was wonderful to have him weighing in, and whether it was line edits or kind of more thematic things like, oh, don't bother spending so much time on that, focus on this instead. And then he sent it off to editors at various publishers, and it also got into the hands of some production companies, which was fun, which kind of brought a whole other element to this wild ride. And then we had a few meetings. Because Jennifer was in Boston and I'm in New York, we never met with any of the publishers in person. We actually never met our editor in person still. Now there's a good reason for that. There wasn't really a year ago. It just we didn't have time to stop and go meet, for me to go across town. But we had a lot of phone calls, and it was kind of a whirlwind, but our agent really helped us shape that proposal, distill what it was we wanted to say in the book and what we didn't want to say. This is not going to be a book about X, Y, and Z. And to know that up front was really helpful for us.
Yeah.
But I think looking at someone else's proposal as a guide was the best first step we could take.
Yeah. And Danielle, how about you? In terms of getting your proposal ready for.
So I had the opposite experience. So this is going to be good for for everybody on the webinar. So I wrote one proposal to get my agent, and then we started over and we wrote a whole other proposal. And I don't, if I had planned ahead, I would have taken a screenshot of my Finder window for all of the documents that went into the proposal. It took quite literally months, and I was shocked. My proposal was I think 28,000 words. My agent is Jen Marshall from Evitas, and she's amazing. Told me that, among other so first of all, it's an amazing story idea, but it's not. The second Varsity Blues broke, right? I thought, wow, people will be looking to do books on this, right? But I didn't have a news pick, right? And so, among other things, Agent Jen told me that people wanted to make sure I could write long. I thought that they would know that, journalists, we're great. We file on time. We don't have typos, or we file at the last minute. And we're but no, they wanted to know that I was going to be able to write 97,000 words, which, as it turned out, was and now that I've written 97,000 words, makes a lot of sense. And I also had to work on the storytelling, because my agent, knows a lot more, obviously, about the market than I do. She said she was amazing. She really helped. The original proposal was thematic, right? I had bucketed out all of these pieces of information, and some of it was kind of chronological, and some of it was home ec in this. But home ec in that. And she was saying, she made the point, there are amazing characters here. It should be much more character driven. And that in itself drove a ton more research, because now that I was making it more character driven, I had to go and find more about the characters than just what they did, you know? I had to go to archives and find out, like, look at their letters and try to get their words. And so, yeah, and also I didn't know this, but apparently, and I'm sure Gail can speak to this, it's comparatively unusual to have a book that's both history and current affairs. And there were a lot of editors who read the proposal and they're like, this is great. We think it should just be history, or this is great. We think it should just be a year in the classroom, or this is great, but we think it should be hidden figures and focus on like one group of women during one span of time. And I thought about doing all of those, and I just eventually, I was like, no, like the story of home ec is a long story, and it continues to today, and I'm just going to have to figure out how to weave all the characters. So yeah, I mean, just that took a lot of, I mean, I started the original, I met with my agent in early March of 2018, and we sent the proposal to editors in September.
Yeah. And Jeff, when you are kind of crafting your proposal, when you're selling, a book where you're going to have to spend a year inside of admissions offices, you're also having to convince, editors that you're going to be able to get inside of those admissions offices. So did you already have the kind of have it locked down before you sold the book, or was it a process of, okay, we sold this book, now I need to go and get into these admissions offices?
Yeah, I mean, Gail may have some insight into how we were able to do this, but no, we didn't have any of the schools lined up. And we met with multiple publishers, and the editors really had to trust that my experience in higher education, I'd been covering this for 20 plus years, we would be able to get that. And obviously, if we couldn't get it, there was no book. But I had kind of put out a bunch of feelers when I was putting out the proposal, but we had decided to kind of get the proposal out there, get something back, rather than wait to have the institutions lined up. Because to be honest with you, it's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg. The institutions, I think, wanted to know before I approached them, is there really a book deal here? Because they wanted to cooperate with something that was real, not something that you were going to go and start reporting and maybe never get a deal for. So that was a little bit of the back and forth that I had with the institutions. And I was confident that I could get something, but to be honest with you, I didn't think it would be as hard as it was. As I mentioned in the introduction, I approached 24 colleges and universities, and only the 3 that are in the book said yes.
And so, Gail, as we've heard, there are a lot of different ways that books make it to this stage. Can you just kind of talk to us about how, as an agent, you know that a proposal is ready, is it's in its polished form and is ready to send to editors?
There actually is this moment. I just had this. I'm about to go out with a proposal about by a young man who was the head of the debate team, was at Harvard and the Australian debate team, and he's a lovely writer, and he's trying to teach us what the art of debate can teach us about arguing better and deciding which arguments to take on today. And it's really quite wonderful. But there was this day, we do a lot of work in my office on proposals, as Jeff knows. I mean, I have somebody who just works almost full time with me on proposals. And they're just, for me, there's like this moment when the piece comes together and I say, it's ready. And then I just know it. And sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes it's shockingly fast. I mean, and then you're playing with it. And the Jeff example is a very good one. We had a terrific idea. It was timely, and it was a matter of having enough so that I could take him to New York. And the fact that we didn't have the schools didn't matter, because you sit down with Jeff and all that we had. I mean, we had a 30-page proposal. It wasn't nothing, right? But it promised a lot, and it wouldn't have worked if it was someone who had not spent that much time in this world as respected. And able to get the access. I mean, it's fascinating to me that this panel here tonight, because you're all coming from very different places. Melissa's coming out of being on an incredibly hot story with enormous potential and having the talent to take advantage of being in the right place at the right time. And Danielle, your story is one of history, but it includes contemporary history as well, and it speaks to our culture and time wonderfully, it sounds like. And Jeff had to get all this access and do all this running around. And so these are very different books. That's what I love about when people say, do you do a lot of books in education? I mean, I do a fair amount of books in education, but it's also that education crosses over with so many things. Education is such a fundamental pillar of who we are as a society and as book readers. And those are the people that I work on to get, those are readers. I mean, you're always thinking about to whom are you writing, right? I had a client once who put something up in their office that was a picture of just a person they imagine was their reader. And they just kept saying, what would that person want? And so people who care about many, many different facets of education, from parenting to history, to college, to scandal, they love to read these kinds of books. And I don't mean to not say when I know a proposal's ready. It just is something and you don't want to rush it. I mean, I've sold books based on 3 pages and on 30,000 word proposals. It's ready when it's ready. I don't mean to sound like Justice Frankfurter or whomever, but yeah. I know it when I see it.
And just thinking about balancing, because as we've all mentioned, writing a book is a major endeavor. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of reporting. So how do you both balance one? Maybe it's your day job, and maybe it's just life generally, with this kind of all-consuming thing that is writing a book. And actually, Danielle, I want to go to you first. How do you just make sure that you're finding time for writing a book and also just the rest of life?
Yeah, balance. What's that? Yeah, so we were discussing this right before we started. So I left my job to do the fellowship, and my job, the Times Pick did not hold my job. And so I ended up afterwards, I had an agent, I was working on that version of the proposal, and I knew that I couldn't see taking another full-time job because I just wasn't in a position to try to start a new beat and also keep working on the book. So I really committed to working on the book. And I unfortunately, did not get quit your job money when I sold the book, and I didn't actually have a job. So most of my last two years, I've been writing the book and trying to do enough freelancing to make, pay my mortgage, and to worries about keeping my name out there. I didn't want to totally disappear. I tried doing a part-time job in the restaurant industry because I live in New Orleans, where you can actually, people make a living doing that, but it was completely exhausting. And I was doing crazy things for 6 months, working working shifts Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then leaving the next morning, driving someplace to work on a freelance story or to an archive for 4 days, coming back at Friday at 2 p.m. and changing my clothes and going to the restaurant. I don't recommend it. But it's also, the problem is it's really easy to not work on your book, even if everything in your life is built around working on your book, because it's so daunting. So Catherine Reynolds Lewis, who some of you guys will know, she's an EWA member, she gave me her spreadsheet. And it was just a week by week, day by day. I mean, I adapted it of these are the 3 things I'm doing today, and 9 to 12 working on freelance assignment, 1 to 5. And I tried to get my editor to give me interim deadlines, which she basically didn't do. But there are editors who will be better at like helping you structure your time. So then it was just, you know, and I also got to the point that I think just about everybody gets to, where you just have to throw everything else out the window and you just have to finish it. And that coincided with the start of the pandemic. And I, you know, filed for self-employment, unemployment, and turned off everything as of like April 15th, and was using a habit tracker where like you turn into a Legend of Zelda character. And if you don't finish your tasks, your team members get injured. Well, they're like Zelda characters do. And I just like worked into, and I still had so much work to do. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, I don't think that you can expect balance if you are working on a book. If you have a day job, then you're just working nonstop. If you don't have a day job, you're also working nonstop. So I think my piece of advice for everybody is you should really want to write your book.
Yeah.
It really helps to have a topic that you can live with so intimately, so deeply for a very long time. Right? The last thing you want is to be like halfway through the book and kind of tired of the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, before we get to Jeff, I just want to remind the audience, if you have questions, you can ask them in the control panel. But Jeff, and we'll be opening the floor for Q&A momentarily. But Jeff, actually, same question to you. Kind of having written several books, what was the difference in your balance in your first book to the balance now?
A huge difference. I mean, the first book was largely reported on Chronicle time because I was essentially writing the book for the Chronicle in some ways. And it was a subject that I knew so well that it was almost a brain dump, right? Where this one was completely different. It was not a subject I knew well. It was obviously playing out as I was in it, right? So I kept struggling with this idea because I had a deadline. So, I got the contract for the book in July of 2018. I started reporting it that fall for that cycle. And anything about admissions, admission season is really not over until March or April of 2019. Of course, then Varsity Blues breaks in, March of 2019. So I kept struggling with this idea of how much can I write as I'm in the process, because the deadline was the following October. So if the process didn't finish until April or May, I had to write that and I didn't start writing, I had to write that entire book between April, May, essentially, and October of 2019. So I started writing as we went along. I would, which, this is kind of a skill that I had as a reporter too. I'd get off an interview and I'd write up notes almost in story form. So I'd remember them, they'd be fresh in my mind. And that's what I did whenever I was inside these offices for days at end, inside the admissions process. I would come back at night and I would just write about that day. Now, it's not exactly efficient because probably half of that ended up not in the book, but it was efficient in that I didn't have to go back and recreate that months later. I was also really lucky. I decided to work with somebody who used to work at the Chronicle, a former editor there, Scott Smallwood, who now runs Open Campus. And he kind of was my book/writing coach. So we would get together on a regular basis. He would kind of keep me on task and kind of knew the subject matter, was a really good storyteller. So he had strengths that I felt like I didn't have. And so we complemented each other really well. But more than anything, he kind of kept me on task, which is something that you need to, whether it's a habit tracker, an editor. I would check in with Gail and I would check in with my editor on at times, but your agent and your editor have a million other projects going on too, right? They're not there. They're not meant to be there for you as much as you need somebody. So you need somebody, I think, in your life. And trust me, my spouse didn't want to do that. She was kind of tired of, she's kind of tired of hearing about the book after a while. And I needed to save, marriage is a very good thing during these things, I think. So I needed somebody else. And so I highly encourage you, whether it's a friend, a colleague, or somebody, you don't have to have them in your life every moment of the day, but have somebody there to kind of keep you on task.
Yeah, absolutely. And Melissa, so you were writing the book as you were reporting for the Wall Street Journal. Just walk us through that life.
Yeah, so first off, I totally agree with Jeff. Having somebody to help keep you accountable and on task is huge. My person was my co-author. Jennifer is peppy and energetic and enthusiastic and optimistic and everything I'm not most of the time. So it was a wonderful partner to have, because our motto very quickly became, we'll get there, we'll get through it, we'll do it. And we did. So we were starting in March 2019, Varsity Blues was the only thing I wrote about for the journal, save like 2 stories for almost a year. So a lot of my reporting for the journal was able to feed into the book. And if you look in the end notes, there's a ton of references to journal articles because, they had their germs in a WSJ piece, and then we were able to kind of build off of that, or, people came to us after reading one of those stories. So I had kind of 2 sets of Google Docs, things I was working for the journal. Sometimes some things would move over into the book doc. We had an agreement with the journal that if we came across breaking news in the course of our reporting of the book, the journal had right of first refusal to it. So we couldn't hold breaking news for the book. So there were a few times where we had things that we said, this is going to be a journal story. And we wrote a journal story, but again, at most 2,000 words, plenty more material to still go into the book. There were a few times we thought we had something and the journal said, no, we're not really that interested in it. So we could kind of transfer all of that over. It was a lot of nights, a lot of weekends. Jeff says marriage is a good thing to have during this. My marriage ended during the writing of the book. It was a stressful year. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and in the acknowledgments, I apologized to her for being fairly distracted. She was very supportive and is very excited about the book. She thinks it's pretty cool because she can find her name in the book. But this was not an easy year and a half, whatever process. So Jennifer and I were approved for book leave from the journal. We were each going to take about 3 months and overlap for part of it. But the story was just continued to move so much that our editors said, you can take book leave maybe next year. And you couldn't do that. So we just continued to work through all fall into the winter. We took off the month of January and actually used vacation days from 2019 because neither of us had taken vacation all year, pretty much. So we used vacation days to kind of cover ourselves so that we didn't have to take unpaid leave. So the month of January was that moment, Danielle, that period of kind of everything else is put on hold. And this is the only thing you have to focus on. I would drop my daughter off at school, come home, sit in my chair and write. And, morning till night. Sometimes I'd forget to eat, like all of those bad habits and stuff. We handed in the first manuscript at the beginning of March. And then the world stopped. And we did some edits, and then the book came out a few months later. So it was a very kind of accelerated process, but it was also, I didn't have it hanging over my head for 7 or 8 years, right? So it happened, and then I started to get my other parts of my life back. I will say it's exhausting. Like there's no way around it. If you are writing a book, it's exhausting. It can be all consuming. But if it's a topic that you're interested in or care about, you don't mind that so much. Like, yeah, I was tired and I was really excited to take naps again or get to bed before midnight or things like that. But it was such a fun experience doing all of that it was worth it.
Yeah. And actually, Danielle, I wanted to bounce that one off of you just really quickly. You mentioned that you were coming to a new topic that you hadn't really explored in a beat way. Can you just talk about that moment when you figured that this was, one, the thing that you were going to be passionate enough to write through 97,000 words of, but then two, that this was something that you how did you figure out that this was going to be the one thing that you were passionate enough to write through 97,000 words of?
So I would say that one of my great personal paradoxes in life is that I'm terrible at making small decisions, but like the big decisions are like that. And I truly just knew. As soon as I had the idea, I mean, like I could hear like the angels sing. It was truly like that. And the second, and I also, I mean, I got immediate feedback, which is that almost everybody I've told about this book since I got the idea, everybody has said, oh, wow. And then they start telling me about their home ec experience. So they tell me why they didn't take home ec, or, oh, I, tried, if they were a guy, right? Like, oh, I tried to, but they wouldn't let me. And then they sort of meander and they say, we should bring that back. Like kids today, they don't know how to cook. They throw out their clothes if they, lose a button. Like I just got that response every single time, right? Yeah, Jeff is on it. So and I think one thing that felt especially good is one thing that I gained from doing the Night Wallace that people can gain in many ways in their career is a feeling that I really wanted to turn my career towards like doing stories that only I could do, where like I felt like I really had something special to bring to it. And so this topic very much felt like my topic. And I finally, the funny thing about this, I didn't remember until I'd been working on the project for quite literally 6 months that my mother double majored in home ec and journalism. So when I remembered that, it definitely, was like, oh, right, yeah, if I thought about that from the beginning, that would have been a great starting point. But I did.
And Gail, I saw you had one note, and then we'll open the floor up for Q&A.
I was just going to say, in terms of thinking about time and commitment and the subject that you still makes you happy, and at the end of that writing process, you need to keep going, because the more and more today, the authors are promotion and publicity partners with their publishers, and so that energy has to go on, and there may be a gap in time, but you're still working during that time after the book is edited and copy edited and galleys and all those things. You're trying to be there to help sell as many copies as possible. So it's a long process, even if it's on an expedited schedule, which Melissa was on, but and many books are today because of the nature of the business, but still that's time consuming. So you even have to love it. I mean, look, if it's going to make you miserable, don't do it. But I would say that most people I know who have that feeling in here to want to try it are happy after they do.
So now we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. As you see, Allison's rejoined us. So Allison, I guess, can hand it to you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, Adam and everybody. This has been a great conversation so far. Just as a reminder to everyone, we already have a bunch of questions in the queue, but if you want to throw your question in the ring, we'll try to get to as many as possible and just use that questions box. The first one I want to throw out to everybody is one from Jamal Abdul-Alim, and he asks, there are many titles that contain the words A Year Inside and The Secret History of. So he has a twofold question. How old can A Year Inside book be, and what's the threshold for calling any history or anything else secret or hidden?
Gail probably could.
Yeah, let me jump in here. They too tend to be, we've all spent a lot of time figuring out titles and subtitles. And I once had a fight with a publisher where the subtitle, it was a book about Ulysses Grant and Mark Twain's friendship, and it was called Grant and Twain, and then it had some accolade, the most important friendship in the world or something like that. And we fought with the publisher, and I said, no, and the publisher just said, no, yes, it is. And that was the first line in the New York Times review. We love this book, but at least then they said, well, we're sure it was the publisher's doing, which was helpful. But, I don't think I always say the phrase publishing business is an oxymoron, although it's getting a little bit more rational. So I don't think I'm not being facetious about the questioner's question, but who knows? There's no rule. There are rules about some things, like to call a book a revision, it has to have more than a 20% change, but there's no rule about when something's secret and when something's a year inside.
And I could just add that, I mean, I also have a long subtitle that does not say like the greatest ever, fortunately, but I don't care what they call the damn book. Like I leave a lot of that stuff up to my agent and my editor because they sell books. And, you know, in this case, I really did feel, I mean, this is a history that nobody knows. This is a history that doesn't exist. This is a history that like, I can tell you how many books and dissertations and art like I read from, you know, the year one to put together. So it really is. But I mean, look, my one feeling was I didn't want the word girls in the title. There are all these books out lately that's like the history girls, the something girls, and like that's the only thing I didn't want.
Great, thanks everybody. So our next question comes from Laura Meckler, and kind of touched on this earlier. I loved the one about like the Zelda characters, but does anyone else want to chime in on what organizational tools did you find were most useful to keep track of all your material as you were reporting and writing the book?
We used Google Docs. So because Jennifer and I were in different locations, some of the tools and apps and stuff that are out there for book writing, for keeping track of your manuscript and stuff, you can't have two users in at once, which made it just impossible for us. So we used Google Docs, and we had each chapter had a different Google Doc of notes. And when we would finish an interview or something fit right, we would kind of put it in the various pieces in all of those docs, knowing that we would come back to it. We then made sure to save all of those docs before we started, you know, putting them into an actual narrative form. I'd say a spreadsheet with contacts is the best thing you can do, because I did not do a very good one all the time. We had spreadsheets of all the lawyers involved in the case and like who last talked to them and when. But to do that for everybody would be certainly helpful.
I've used Script.
There's a piece of software that a couple of my clients use, and I'm just forgetting the name, but I can send it to the questioner.
Yeah, maybe Scrivener. Is it Scrivener good?
Yeah, Scrivener. That's it.
A lot of people use, I wrote I think my first book, maybe my second book in Scrivener. I didn't love it. It's not, I didn't find all of its power to be that intuitive. I mean, some of the basic stuff you can obviously figure out, but at the end, I just used, you know, Google Docs and Word and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not the most organized reporter, so I'm not the best to give advice on that. I think you just kind of find what works for you and use it. But if you try to learn all these new tools, I feel like you waste all this time trying to do that and you get frustrated. And trust me, the last thing you want to do is lose something that you just worked, you know, for a day on or 2 days on or whatever.
Yeah. And my one piece of advice on this, if you're doing I used Zotero, which is a bibliography software for if you're doing anything with a significant historical or archival component, definitely use something like that to keep track of all your sources. And just generally speaking, when you're working, like footnote everything, including your, like in your proposal, so that you can go back and fact check, because like you get so far into it and you're like, where the hell is that interview? Where the hell, I mean, even if it's just like pink notebook, just so you know, you can go back and retrace your steps.
One other thing, Allison, that Amanda Ripley actually told me to do that I thought was a really good idea was because now so much stuff is then being made into podcasts, and I think Smartest Kids in the World is being made into some sort of documentary. She said, you know, try to record and take pictures of everything if you can, obviously, if you're working on something contemporary. So, you know, I have a lot of audio and video and photography from throughout the book. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but, you know, I possibly could use it for different things. So think about multimedia, I guess, as you're doing the reporting as well.
Adam, did you have one you were going to throw in?
My only thing was that with Scrivener, if you're like me, and I think Jeff is also like this, it's like not the most organized reporter, but like if you have some basic functions that works. The thing that was nice about Scrivener is that I can break out every chapter into their individual things and also have it in one place. So I'm not having to open a bunch of tabs in Google Docs. And I also don't have to scroll really far on a Microsoft Word doc.
Also, if anyone is willing to share even like screenshots of part of it or anything like that, I'm sure people would really appreciate that. And we could throw that on our landing page where all your book links are, because I know that's a question that a lot of people have interest in. We also have a question from our own Kim Clark at EWA, who is asking Gail if she can maybe riff on some education topics that there might be some book appetite for.
Huh. Well, sometimes it's always hard to say, well, publishers are looking for this or they're looking for that. As I said before, education goes so far across the spectrum. I mean, look at, one could argue that Jeff's book is a parenting book as well as a education book, and Melissa's is a current events book, right? And so a great story that, I always say people read books for two reasons, or buy books, more importantly. Buy books for two reasons today. One, because they need to get smarter about a topic. For work, for health, for their kids, for whatever, they need to have it to be smarter about something. And the other is to escape their lives or be inspired or just, and that's, great history or great storytelling or even memoir, because some people like to get out of their lives because somebody else's life is much more screwed up than their own or something. And it's a way to survive your own life, or you're even an inspirational book. And the best are the ones that get between the two of them. Jeff's is a book that makes people much smarter about admissions, but it's also a great read. And for anybody who cares about the business of college or the manipulation of our brains and marketing and all those things, it takes you there. And it sounds like the same way with everybody else's book here. So there's not like one subset of things that you can talk about. There's always interest in books for the modern American parent who's totally freaked out about the modern American child. That's a constant area of, so it's really something you have to say or you care about that someone's going to plop down $30 for. And those are really the two reasons that they do that.
Great. And then kind of as a follow-up from Kim, this one I guess is more directed at Gail, but if anyone wants to chime in with what they got, do you have a kind of range for the size of a typical advance? And does anyone want to be transparent and share theirs? I know sometimes with money people aren't willing, but maybe for, helping everyone out to kind of get a better idea of what they're looking at.
Anybody else want to say anything?
I don't even remember, so.
Agents, we only make money if you make money. So as a practical matter, I don't do books unless I'm doing it for a cause that I care a lot about or something that I want to, support. One doesn't do books where the advance is less than, high five figures, and then from then on, my job is to help you or whomever find the right book so that not only are they having to work 3 jobs or whatever, they're able to know that a publisher is going to put some muscle behind it, because why do all this if people aren't going to read your book?
I'll say that ours was 6 figures, and the TV deal, if it actually goes into development, is similar. Split.
I can't. If I were specific, my agent would kill me. But I will say mine was 5 figures, and you should remember that it's minus the percentage for your agent, and you don't get it all at once.
No, that's the hardest part for people to grapple with, and that's changed. When I started in this business, you got half your advance on the signing of the agreement and half on the acceptance of your manuscript. Now, pretty much across the board, with some exceptions, it's 4 payments. And those they don't have to be equal. 4 payments are some number on signing, some number on acceptance, some number on a publication, and then 12 months after publication. So that can go on for years. That's why with somebody like Melissa, at least you got all your money pretty close together because you had a deal, you wrote it, was published very quickly.
And I think it's a good point. I think Gail's right? It's spread out over all these years, and I think that's why at the end of the day, the money matters. So you may have multiple publishers interested. You may have and this has happened to me, as Gail knows, right? Sometimes I might have a favorite editor, but somebody's willing to pay more for it. And when, all these things we just talked about, all the things you have to give up to write this book. And I think somebody said earlier about selling the book. Melissa and I were kind of riffing on this over the weekend. Not only do you have to like your topic enough to go beyond just writing it and finishing it, as Gail said, but so much of the book writing process now is about selling the book. And in fact, when Gail and I would do meetings in New York when we were just selling the proposal, it seems like there's always more marketing and publicity people in those meetings than there are editors in those meetings, right? Because they're part of the idea is not just as a good idea from a writing perspective, but will people actually buy this? Will journalists actually cover it? And so I think that before you write a book, you also have to know that you're in it to sell it, and that you're willing to do everything in your power to get that book out into the wider world. Because if you do all this work and it just falls flat, it's disappointing. And so I think that as journalists, we sometimes think, well, that's somebody else's job to sell our work. And I think that I always tell people, if you don't sell your book, no one else is going to sell it for you. So I know that people probably get really annoyed with my Twitter feed in the last couple of weeks, or my Facebook feed, or whatever it is, or all these journalists who I've been reaching out to, and I say, hey, how can I get a piece into your publication? But you have to do it, because there's only so much the publisher is going to do.
Yeah, you have to be tired. You have to be unabashed, and you have to call in chits, and you have to, but everybody does it, and it's for a good cause, which is making, changing lives. That's what I always say, books change lives. So that's why you do it. I'm sorry, Melissa.
Yeah, there's as Jeff said, there are a lot of publicity and marketing people in the room during like those early talks. But once the book is, and they'll ask you for your contact list, and they will line up, a radio interview set or whatever, and during the pandemic, it's certainly strange, right? Because you're not doing in-person bookstore events, you're doing Zoom bookstore events. And if you're doing Zoom bookstore events, people from all over the country can go to one. They don't need to wait to come to their local bookstore. So those have diminishing returns at some point. I'd say about half of the events Jennifer and I have done, or more than half, we've arranged ourselves. I have 4 book events every night this week. It's a lot. It is a ton of work after publication. And I don't know that I really quite understood that ahead of time.
And as Gail probably could tell you more about the history of this, I think back in the day, publications used to truly run excerpts, and now it's all adapted excerpts, which really mean a lot of sometimes new work. And so there's a lot of right. So there's a lot of new writing and reporting that you're still doing about this subject. So I'm not trying to discourage anybody, but it doesn't. I actually think trying to sell and publicize the book, especially now in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a presidential election, and all the other stuff going on, is almost sometimes as much work as writing the book.
Right, a little hard to grab attention.
I will say my advance was also 6 figures.
Sorry, do you mind repeating that?
Yeah, I was just saying my advance was also 6 figures.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the time. Sorry for this at the end. Have a good rest of your evening.
Everybody, good luck.
Thanks, everybody.